So here I am sitting in my car, about ready to drive off and have more fun tonight. But wanted to talk a little bit about Heroic Journey, and the particular theme of this episode of Heroic Journey, talking about before we actually do the show, is, sorry for the radio there, but the theme is about supporting your fellow players. It's sort of a couple of different thoughts on that. One of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit is we'll aim for things like not just in the political social arena, but mechanically, and there are some classes that perhaps are archetypes that aren't seen as being very supportive. Rather than always assuming that you won't be supporting people, like for example, a fighter in a situation where the mage needs to get off the big spell, he may not be seen as supporting the wizard or priest casting the important spells. So is he really supporting someone? I mean, what can the thief do to support the rest of the team? He doesn't do things like he doesn't buff people. He doesn't, add advantages to most people that they would have. So what would he do in a situation where it was necessary to get a better chance for the rest of the group or another individual to pull something off? What can he do? For example, with the thief, I was thinking along these lines of, okay, he's a thief archetype, stealth character. What are you going to do in a situation that would make your ally's job easier? And as a thief, one of the things you could do is you could try and create distractions, or flanking maneuvers would be another way to think of it. Ways to force the opposition to divide their forces easier and faster than if it was a unified front. That may not always be possible in a strictly dungeon type environment, but there may be options for that. Other things may be, for example, setting traps so that way the opposition has to come through a dangerously tactical area that may not be obvious to them in the first place. So, what are we going to do to make this area more dangerous, forcing them to either slow down so that they don't approach your allies as fast as they ordinarily would, or to make it hazardous. For example, setting up a tripwire or caltrops and marbles would be another example. Foot hazards for the advancing group to face off against would be another example of how a thief could think and plan ahead. It's not necessarily just limited to thieves, especially in a D&D type environment. And with the more recent versions of AD&D, there may not be as much of a demand for these abilities to be, for example, in equipment or other options like that. So that may be something to think about, how your powers can be used, or choices you can make to support the rest of your group, which may not be as common in earlier editions, but maybe more common now at post 3.5, 4, 5, things like that. So that's something I've been thinking about, as well as things like, there's all sorts of advancements and feats that have come about in later editions I'm not as familiar with. And it's fine. I'll probably eventually get exposed to all of these. It should be very interesting. But I was just sort of thinking that it isn't always up to the fighter or it's not always up to the mage or the cleric to cast buffing spells to be support. Having food or other things like that. Maybe all sorts of interesting things. Looks like a photo enforcement van just took a couple of pictures. Might have been able to see the reflection off my face. I was looking at the video screen. I'll check that later. Somebody may be busted speeding. I hope they know the laws about that. So, but anyways, back onto the main focus. I wonder if that could be an example of not necessarily a support vehicle, but a robotic ally. Could be a photo van, or example of a hacker having access to more interesting avenues of dealing with issues than a standard. That could be something interesting for like a cyberpunk character hack into the photo van, either find photos of fleeing vehicle or other things, like for example setting one off even though the opposition is driving, perhaps as a type of flash distraction or a way to do all sorts of things. That could be interesting. I'll have to store that away later. But back to supporting, it's one of those things where it's easy to see in some places how certain powers and advantages naturally lend themselves to an advancement. For example, a elf in basic Dungeons and Dragons may not always have magic missile. The classic art from several modules showed a elven character using spider climb to get him in the picture and attacking the opposition from a different direction. And that would be something that I could see a fighter doing to self-buff. It's like, well, yeah, you may think that you're doing great up until the point you come across the weird guy who swings at you with a sword from halfway up the wall. What are you going to do then? You can't exactly close with him at that point. You need to pull back or face the fact that this guy has a weapon, and it could be a long weapon like a trident or something, stuck in his hand, and he's reaching down and jabbing you guys. You might have a problem with that. You could easily have a problem with that, especially if you don't have a polearm to reach him and scrape him off the wall, or a ranged weapon to throw or hit him with. That I could see being a very interesting way to use a buffing power to make a difference in a combat. So, something I haven't seen a bunch of in actual campaigns I've been in. Other people may have different experiences. It certainly happens. Just sort of a little thought that popped in my head. I think it was a piece of Errol Otis art. One of those things. What else? A couple other options we could think about is providing there are certain pieces of equipment that a lot of GMs don't like. There's disarming polearms in first edition. There are other ways to, for example, in B2, there is a whip that you only find in the monsters having used it against you the first time in the entire module. It's not magical. It is essentially a coiled whip, does the whole Indiana Jones thing, entangles a member of the opposition, and sort of takes him out of combat for a little bit. Well, what happens if you pick it up, coil it, and use it against a monster? What do you do then? There's no guidelines on it, there's no write-up, and it's a mundane item. So you could make more of these. All you need is honestly somebody who knows how to work leather and weave it. That's not that difficult in medieval society. Suddenly you've got the entire party could have this within a week or two. Easily. Shouldn't be that difficult. I've known guys that I've seen weave leather. Not that hard. I've seen guys make programs. Not that difficult. Well, I mean, it requires skill. It does require talents and trainings, but time-wise, after you understand what the heck you're doing, it doesn't take as long as a lot of people like to think. So the entire party having this weapon, or even just the fighters, maybe the thieves, maybe a couple other people, now what is the GM going to do? They use that on a mage. He's going to have problems casting his spells. They use that on, a couple of goblins to take him out for a round or two, and suddenly what was a very even battle becomes a very lopsided battle rapidly. That's something that, I could see maybe not having been considered. So, and as a way to support your other team members, it's like, okay, he's the bad guy, he's got a special weapon, he's got, this, that, or the other. Well, let's make his life difficult. What's going to happen then? For example, that weapon generally, I think, is either you find around the goblins or the gnolls. I forget which. I'd have to go look at the module again. What happens if you use it against the Minotaur? mean, is he powerful enough to break out of it? I don't know. And I don't think there's any rules for that either. So what are you going to do then? You just go, okay, I found this. Your turn. Suddenly the ball's in the GM's court. Yeah, they're going to have to make decisions like that. And I may be able to contact, like, for example, Ernie Gygax or maybe Jim Wampler or one of the other, legendary greats, and say, hey, look, this item's here in this book. Do you have any additional information about it? Or is it just, kind of GM's call the whole thing? Or is it just supposed to be a one-shot that the players are supposed to break it, not be able to rebuild it, which doesn't strike me as logical. And, we've got an issue. What's going on? And it's one of those weird things. It's just in there. And it's okay. I'm not complaining about it. It can be, if the players look at it and seize upon it, it could be anywhere from a, mundane treasure that's worth way more than the people thought it was, all the way to a real headache for the GM. So that's something you should look at as a GM when you're running the game anyways, is there anything weird in that module I haven't seen elsewhere? Let's look at that. I should look and see if there are whips in the RMCI. It could be interesting. I'll have to check my books. Just, thoughts like that. So, back on to supporting people. Is it bad in other editions? Or, is it bad to have the whole team be able to gang up and reduce the effectiveness of a major monster as a group? Because it seems like it shouldn't be. I mean, this is basic support here. This is everybody dogpile on the big baddie and take him out. And if you've got unusual ways of doing that, you probably should use them. Even if they could be problematic. Even if they could be, something that's unusual. I've seen whips made out of chainmail. They work great. The only reason why you don't see them very often is because chainmail's not as much of an art these days as it once was. Well, it's still an art. It's not practiced as much as it was. And honestly, the guy discovered that the chainmail whip he was using wouldn't get the supersonic crack without 6 inches of leather. This is interesting because I've known people who are like, a whip, I'm not worried about whip balls. Cut that in half and then he'll only have half of a, chunk of leather. Well, if it's made out of chainmail, you're not cutting that anytime soon. Now I am Mr. of the Dark. You can't see my face. Sorry. Looks myself in the video. I'm like, I'm Mr. Black. Anyways, just sort of a thought thing. It's like you could take things, put them together in ways that other people hadn't considered, and what are you going to do then? It solves a lot of issues. Suddenly, leather is not necessarily something to break either. And once you've got the cross patterning down for chainmail, it's even tougher. That's just sort of a thing you can think about. Great idea you could use later on. Really cause people to scratch their heads like I'm doing right now, and make them think for a little bit. Let's kind of challenge these people we've got here. Let's make people think, because that's part of the fun of the game. Is you do need to make people think. You do need to, challenge everybody. And a lot of times GMs are just going to say no. I'm not always happy about that. I understand why. I get that they can see that things are going to be a headache. But once you use it against the players, turnabouts, fair play. Well, that's all for now. Have fun, enjoy yourselves, and look forward to seeing Heroic Tourney soon. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.